A ceasefire in Yemen is war was broken minutes after coming into effect. Pro-government officials say the warring sides had agreed for a truce deal to be implemented in the port city of Hodeidah at midnight local time, 21:00 GMT, on Tuesday. But there have been reports of sporadic clashes between the Houthi rebels and pro-government forces in the city, which is a vital gateway for aid. The rebels have reportedly shelled government forces in eastern Hodeidah. One pro-government official told AFP news agency clashes were ongoing. Both sides agreed to the ceasefire at unsponsored talks in Sweden last Thursday, and some hoped it would be the starting point to bringing nearly 4 years of civil war to a close. But the truce was delayed on Friday, following reports of strikes and fierce clashes. Hodeidah, 140 kilometers (90 miles) west of the capital Sana'a, was Yemen's fourth largest city and the major economic hub before rebels took control of it in late 2014. Since June it has been under assault by a Saudi-led coalition backing the pro-government troops. As a port, it is also a lifeline for just under 2/3 of Yemen's population, who rely almost entirely on imports for food, fuel and medicine. More than 22 million Yemenis need some form of aid, and 8 million do not know how they will obtain their next meal. BBC Africa editor Fergal King visits South Africa's conservative rural areas nearly 25 years after white minority rule ended, and finds that racism is still deeply embedded, but there are also symbols of racial reconciliation. It was a young boy who noticed us and ran to tell his father, around 10 years old, blonde-haired and barefoot. He rushed indoors. The child looked scared. It was dusk and we were strangers. I caught sight of him in the rearview mirror as we drove along the dirt road that ran past the tall steel fence that encircled their home. Maybe 10 minutes later a car approached from behind. Headlights flashed beckoning us to stop. We pulled up within a few yards of each other. It was an old car, a Toyota from the 1990s, beaten and rusted. It is a vehicle of the rural poor. The young white man got out. He wore a baseball cap, pulled down over his forehead, and his right hand sat on the revolver strapped to his hip. There was a young woman with a baby on her lap in the front seat. She looked exhausted, her hair lank and eyes struggling to stay open. The child was ill, coughing, and its face covered in red blotches. I saw the man relax as I got out of the car and approached him. I greeted him in Afrikaans. The hand came away from his hip. "You frightened them, you know," he said, pointing towards the house. "They called up on the radio, and we came to check on you. They did not know who you was. We talked to each other on the radio," he said. There had been farm attacks in the area. There was constant theft. The young man pointed across the railway tracks to where the fields were now dissolving into the dark. "The farmer over there, if he sees anyone on his land, he is likely to just take a shot. He will fire at anything. Be more careful, man," he said. This was near Potchefstroom on the Flatland, an Afrikaans word which refers to the great rolling heartland, encompassing vast swathes of the South African interior. More than 20 years after watching black and white leaders negotiate an end to the racist system of apartheid, I was driving west of the main city, Johannesburg, to test how much had changed in what had been the most conservative part of South Africa. Potchefstroom, Ventersdorp, Falkville, and numerous other towns and villages had provided the muscle for an abortive right-wing rebellion. The leader of the neo-Nazi Afrikaner resistance movement, ONW, Eugene Tarabani, had sworn never to surrender to black rule. "We will level them with the gravel," I heard him declare one hot afternoon. in Vanderbilt, there were threats to set up white republics, but the rebellion failed, snuffed out, when a black soldier killed 3 AUG members in cold blood on a rural road, and terrified the rest into going home and living with the new dispensation. This was after AUG members shot civilians in and around the Platland town of Mafeking in March 1994. Chirac was murdered 16 years later by one of his own workers. His movement splintered. Chirac became irrelevant. Most Afrikaners accepted the compromise, which led to black majority rule. But traveling across the Platland, it is obvious that while dreams of white secession have evaporated, there is much that isn't changed. I was going back to a place where many black people resent the inequality which keeps 67% of arable farmland in white hands, and where white people fear violent attack and dispossession. It is not that South Africa has become newly racist, unequal or violent. It was always all of these things. The violence of racial discrimination and the resentment it bred are part of the nation's DNA. Social media has provided an outlet for amplifying the crudest racial slurs, and anger over corruption and inequality have stoked an increasingly fragile environment. What is striking is the way in which racial resentment can still be so brutally expressed. Last February, a subtract-year-old black athlete, Thubamosi Aho, was walking with some friends in Potchefstroom when he saw a shop assistant being insulted by a group of young white men. It was a Saturday night. When Mr. Mosi Aho and a friend intervened, they were set upon. They were hitting me until I was unconscious, he remembered. Then I woke up in the hospital, not knowing what happened. His friend, also an athlete, suffered a broken arm. Mr. Mosi Aho ran for South Africa and lost 3 months from his training because of the beating he received. Worse, he says, is the lingering trauma and fear when he sees groups of white men. I feel really scared. I cannot even go to town alone. I do not know when and where will they come back again. Travel 300 kilometers, 186 miles, southeast to the town of Middelburg, and you learn that racist violence can still be lethal. The town has some bad history. In August 2016, 2 white farmers were filmed beating and then forcing a black man into a coffin, in which they told him he would be buried alive. They were given sentences of 11 and 14 years. In another case, Volaso Indonzane, 26, was driving home in Middelburg one night last July when he found the road blocked by a group of white men. They approached the car and threw alcohol through the open window, drenching the occupants. Mr. Indonzane was dragged out. His friend, Lawrence Nelumoni, witnessed the violence. They pulled out my friend and beat him. When I tried to save him, it was too late. They used all this K-was black, kafir, everything. It was terrible. The K-word was the most offensive racial slur used to humiliate black people during the apartheid years. It is a symbol of dehumanization. Mr. Indonzane died of his injuries. The white attackers have yet to be charged. Mr. Nelumoni is rueful when I ask if those who witnessed the end of apartheid were wrong to believe in a rainbow nation, the multiracial patchwork of peaceful cooperating groups. You are wrong. It's not a rainbow nation. Whites still have more powers. As so often in this country, and in this particular place, there are competing narratives of fear. The white farmers of the Platland worry that their land will be seized under government proposals to take property without compensation. Populist politicians in the radical economic freedom fighters, and some local leaders of the governing African Nationalist Congress ANC have been accused of stoking racial tensions. The South African Human Rights Commission is taking one radical black leader to court over comments he made calling for the killing of white people. And Ilamnanji Xitama, who leads the Black Land First organization, represents a political fringe, but his comments have received widespread publicity and heightened racial tensions. The attacks on white farms, long a feature of rural life, have deepened a sense of alienation from the government on the part of some white farms. Right-wing groups have spread the myth of a white genocide abroad. There is no genocide, but there is genuine fear of physical attack and dispossession. More on race relations. Bernadette Hall witnessed the murder of her husband on their farm, near Falkville, in 2012. Her land is parched and browned from a long southern winter without rain. The cattle are lean,